that it may indicate provisional measures only if the provisions relied on by the applicant appear prima facie to afford a basis on which its jurisdiction could be founded, but it need not satisfy itself in a definitive manner that it has jurisdiction as regards the merits of the case. In the present case, South Africa seeks to found the jurisdiction of the court on Article 36, Paragraph 1 of the Statute of the Court and on Article 9 of the Genocide Convention. The court must therefore first determine whether those provisions prima facie confer upon it jurisdiction to rule on the merits of the case, enabling it, if the other necessary conditions are fulfilled, to indicate provisional measures. Article 9 of the Genocide Convention provides, I quote, disputes between the contracting parties relating to the interpretation, application, or fulfillment of the present convention, including those relating to the responsibility of a state for genocide or for any of the other acts enumerated in Article 3, shall be submitted to the International Court of Justice at the request of any of the parties to the dispute. End of quote. South Africa and Israel are both parties to the Genocide Convention, and neither of them has entered a reservation to Article 9 or any other provision of the Convention. The Court then recalls that Article 9 of the Genocide Convention makes its jurisdiction conditional on the existence of a dispute relating to the interpretation, application, or fulfillment of the Convention. A dispute is a disagreement on a point of law or fact, a conflict of legal views or of interest between parties. In order for a dispute to exist, it must be shown that the claim of one party is positively opposed by the other. The two sides must hold clearly opposite views concerning the question of the performance or non-performance of certain international obligations. To determine whether a dispute exists in the present case, the Court cannot limit itself to noting that one of the parties maintains the Convention applies while the other denies it. Since South Africa has invoked as a basis for the Court's jurisdiction the compromissory clause of the Genocide Convention, the Court must also ascertain at the present stage of the proceedings whether it appears that the acts and omissions...
Just so everybody knows, right now the Court is going through jurisdiction, which is a technical issue about whether there's a dispute. The Convention Against Genocide, which this case is based on, contains a clause that establishes jurisdiction, and using some other language and some other international legal sources requires there to be a dispute between the nations, and so that's what they're analyzing now.
It pays special attention to the author of the statement or document, its intended or actual addressee, and its content. The existence of a dispute is a matter for objective determination by the Court. It is a matter of substance, not a question of form or procedure. The Court notes that South Africa issued public statements in various multilateral and bilateral settings in which it expressed its view that, in light of the nature, scope, and extent of Israel's military operations in Gaza, Israel's actions amounted to violations of its obligations under the Genocide Convention. For instance, at the resumed 10th Emergency Special Session of the United Nations General Assembly on 12 December 2023, at which...
This is good, the fact that she's analyzing the history of their diplomatic dispute. That means that she's probably going into detail about why there is a dispute.
In terms of the Genocide Convention. End of quote. South Africa recalled this statement in its note verbal of 21 December 2023 to the Embassy of Israel in Pretoria. The Court notes that Israel dismissed any accusation of genocide in the context of the conflict in Gaza in a document published by the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs on 6 December 2023, which was subsequently updated and reproduced on the website of the Israel Defense Forces on 15 December 2023 under the title, "The War Against Hamas, Answering Your Most Pressing Questions," stating that, I quote, "The accusation of genocide against Israel is not only wholly unfounded as a matter of fact and law, it is morally repugnant," end of quote. In the document, Israel also stated that, I quote, "The accusation of genocide is not just legally and factually incoherent, it is obscene, and that there
While
was
we're
no valid
listening to
basis
this,
in
I'm going to
fact
turn it down just a little bit. I'll keep my ears open about this issue, but I just want to lay out my analysis real quick. Here's there's 15 judges plus South Africa and Israel. Okay, she is kind of ruling that there's a dispute. Hold on.
Israel in Gaza amount to violations by the latter of its
Gotta love the
obligations
wigs.
under the Genocide Convention. The court finds that the aforementioned elements are sufficient at this stage to establish prima facie the existence of a dispute between the parties relating to the interpretation, application, or fulfillment of the Genocide Convention. As to whether the acts and omissions complained of by the applicant appear to be capable of falling within the provisions of the Genocide Convention, the court recalls that South Africa considers Israel to be responsible for committing genocide in Gaza and for failing to prevent and punish genocidal acts. South Africa contends that Israel has also violated other obligations under the Genocide Convention, including those concerning conspiracy to commit genocide, direct and public incitement to genocide, attempted genocide, and complicity in genocide. At the present stage of the proceedings, the court is not required to ascertain whether any violations of Israel's obligations under the Genocide Convention have occurred. Such a finding could only be made by the court at the stage of the examination of the merits of the present case. At the stage of making an order on the request for an indication of provisional measures, the court's task is to establish whether the acts and omissions complained of by the applicant appear to be capable of falling within the provisions of the Genocide Convention. In the court's view, at least some of the acts and omissions alleged by South Africa to have been committed by Israel
Okay, that's the
in
ruling,
Gaza
guys.
appear to be capable of
ICJ
falling
finds
within the
Israel
provisions of the
has
Convention.
provisionally
In light of the
engaged in
following,
acts
the court
plausibly
concludes that
constituting
prima
genocide.
facie it has jurisdiction pursuant to Article 9 of the Convention to entertain the case. Given this conclusion, the court considers that it cannot accede to Israel's request that the case be removed from the general list. The court turns next to the question of standing of South Africa. The court notes that the respondent did not challenge the standing of the applicant in the present proceedings. In the case concerning application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, the Gambia v. Myanmar, where Article 9 of the Genocide Convention was also invoked, the court observed that all states parties to the convention have a common interest to ensure the prevention, suppression, and punishment of genocide by committing themselves to fulfilling the obligations contained in the convention. Such common interest implies that the obligations in question are owed by any state party to all the other state parties to the relevant convention. They are obligations erga omnes partes, in the sense that each state party has an interest in compliance with them in any given case. The common interest in compliance with the relevant obligations under the Genocide Convention entails that any state party, without distinction, is entitled to invoke the responsibility of another state party for an alleged breach of its obligations erga omnes partes. Accordingly, the court found that any state party to the Genocide Convention may invoke the responsibility of another state party, including through the institution of proceedings before the court, with a view to determining the alleged failure to comply with its obligations erga omnes partes under the convention and to bringing a failure to the end. The court concludes prima facie that South Africa has standing to submit to it the dispute with Israel concerning alleged violations of obligations under the Genocide Convention. The court then turns to the question of the rights whose protection is sought and the link between such rights and the measures requested. It recalls that its power to indicate provisional measures under Article 41 of the statute has as its object the preservation of the respective rights claimed by the parties in a case, pending its decision on the merits thereof. It follows that the court must be concerned to preserve by such measures the rights which may subsequently be adjudged by it to belong to either party. Therefore, the court may exercise this power only if it is satisfied that the rights asserted by the party requesting such measures are at least plausible. At this stage of the proceedings, however, the Court is not called upon to determine definitively whether the rights which South Africa wishes to seek protected exist. It need only decide whether the rights claimed by South Africa and for which it seeks protection are plausible. Moreover, a link must exist between the rights whose protection is sought and the provisional measures being requested. The Court recalls that in accordance with Article 1 of the Convention, all states parties thereto have undertaken to prevent and to punish the crime of genocide. Article 2 provides that, I quote, "Genocide means any of the following acts committed with an intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. A, killing members of the group. B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. E, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group." End of quote. Pursuant to Article 3 of the Genocide Convention, the following acts are also prohibited by the Convention: conspiracy to commit genocide, direct and public incitement to commit genocide, attempt to commit genocide, and complicity in genocide. The provisions of the Convention are intended to protect the members of a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group from acts of genocide or any other punishable acts enumerated in Article 3. The Court considers that there is a correlation between the rights of members of groups protected under the Genocide Convention, the obligations incumbent on state parties thereto, and the right of any state party to seek compliance therewith by another state party. As the Court has stated in other cases, in order for acts to fall within the scope of Article 2 of the Convention, the intent must be to destroy at least a substantial part of a particular group. This is demanded by the very nature of the crime of genocide, since the object and purpose of the Convention as a whole is to prevent the intentional destruction of groups. The part targeted must be significant enough to have an impact on the group as a whole. The Palestinians appear to constitute a distinct national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, and hence a protected group within the meaning of Article 2 of the Genocide Convention. The Court observes that, according to United Nations sources, the Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip comprises over 2 million people. Palestinians in the Gaza Strip form a substantial part of the protected group. The Court notes that the military operation being conducted by Israel following the attack of 7 October 2023 has resulted in a large number of deaths and injuries, as well as massive destruction of homes, the forcible displacement of the vast majority of the population, and extensive damage to civilian infrastructure. While figures relating to the Gaza Strip cannot be independently verified, recent information indicates that 25,700 Palestinians have been killed, over 63,000 injuries have been reported, over 360 housing units have been destroyed or partially damaged, and approximately 1.7 million persons have been internally displaced.
As she's taking a cup of water, let me just remind you, this judge, the leader of the court, Joan Donahue, is a fairly conservative United States appointee.
Emergency Relief Coordinator, Mr. Martin Griffith.
So for her to have to read this is pretty incredible, because I'm not sure that this is where her politics would indicate going.
As temperatures plummet, areas where civilians were told to relocate for their safety have come under bombardment. Medical facilities are under relentless attack. A public health disaster is unfolding. Gaza has simply become uninhabitable. Its people are witnessing daily threats to their very existence while the world watches on. End of quote. Following a mission to North Gaza, the World Health Organization reported that as of 21 December 2023, I quote, an unprecedented 93% of the population of Gaza is facing crisis levels of hunger, with insufficient food and high levels of malnutrition, end of quote. The court further notes the statement issued by the Commissioner General of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, or UNRWA, Mr. Philippe Lazzarini, on 13 January 2024. I quote, "It's been 100 days since the devastating war started, killing and displacing people in Gaza following the horrific attacks that Hamas and other groups carried out against people in Israel. It's been 100 days of ordeal and anxiety for hostages and their families. In the past 100 days, sustained bombardment across the Gaza Strip caused the massive displacement of a population that is in a state of flux, constantly uprooted and forced to leave overnight, only to move to places which are just as unsafe. This war affected more than 2 million people, the entire population of Gaza. Many will carry lifelong scars, both physical and psychological. The vast majority, including children, are deeply traumatized. Overcrowded and unsanitary UNRWA shelters have become home to more than 1.4 million people. They lack everything, from food to hygiene to privacy. People live in inhumane conditions where diseases are spreading, including among children. They live through the unlivable with the clock ticking fast towards famine. The plight of children in Gaza is especially heartbreaking. An entire generation of children is traumatized and will take years to heal. Thousands have been killed, maimed, and orphaned. Hundreds of thousands are deprived of education. Their future is in jeopardy with far-reaching and long-lasting consequences. The UNRWA Commissioner General also stated that the crisis in Gaza is, I quote, compounded by dehumanizing language, end of quote. In this regard, the court has taken note of a number of statements made by senior Israeli officials. It calls attention in particular to the following examples.
Wow, here we go.
On 9 October 2023, Mr. Yoav Gallant, Defense Minister of Israel, announced that he had ordered a complete siege of Gaza City, and then that there would be no electricity, no food, no fuel, and that everything was closed. On the following day, Minister Gallant stated, speaking to Israeli troops on the Gaza border, I quote, "I have released all restraints. You saw what we are fighting against. We are fighting human animals. This is the ISIS of Gaza. This is what we are fighting against. Gaza won't return to what it was before. There will be no Hamas. We will eliminate everything. If it doesn't take one day, it will take a week. It will take weeks or even months. We will reach all places." End of quote. On 12 October 2023, Mr. Isaac Herzog, President of Israel, stated, referring to Gaza, I quote, "We are working, operating militarily according to rules of international law, unequivocally. It is an entire nation out there that is responsible. It is not true, this rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved. It is absolutely..."
I love that she's quoting Herzog, the president of Israel, who conflated Israeli citizens and militants, or Gazan citizens and militants. She is also reading the words of Defense Minister Gallant and presumably here in a second Benjamin Netanyahu, all of whom made literally explicitly genocidal statements indicating they wanted to kill all Palestinians, not just Hamas.
2023, Mr. Israel Katz, then Minister of Energy and Infrastructure of Israel, stated on X, formerly Twitter, I quote, "We will fight the terrorist organization Hamas and destroy it. All the civilian population in Gaza is ordered to leave immediately. We will win. They will not receive a drop of water or a single battery until they leave the world." End of quote. The court also takes note of a press release of 16 November 2023, issued by 37 special rapporteurs, independent experts, and members of working groups part of the special procedures of the United Nations Human Rights Council, in which they voiced alarm over, I quote, "discernibly genocidal and dehumanizing rhetoric coming from senior Israeli government officials." End of quote. In addition, on 27 October 2023, the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination observed that it was highly concerned about the sharp increase in racist hate speech and dehumanization directed at Palestinians since 7 October. In the Court's view, the aforementioned facts and circumstances are sufficient to conclude that at least some of the rights claimed by South Africa and for which it is seeking protection are plausible. This is the case with respect to the right of Palestinians in Gaza to be protected from acts of genocide and related prohibited acts identified in Article 3, and the right of South Africa to seek Israel's compliance with the latter's obligations under the Convention. The Court then turns to the condition of the link between the plausible rights claimed by South Africa and the provisional measures requested.
Okay, here we get
It
to the
considers that by their
part
very nature,
where
at
the
least
Court will
some of
decide
the
what to
provisional
do.
measures sought by South Africa are aimed at preserving the plausible rights it asserts on the basis of the Genocide Convention in the present case, namely, the right of the Palestinians in Gaza to be protected from acts of genocide and related prohibited acts mentioned in Article 3, and the right of South Africa to seek Israel's compliance with the latter's obligations under the Convention. Therefore, a link exists between the rights claimed by South Africa that the Court has found to be plausible and at least some of the provisional measures requested. The Court turns next to the question of risk of irreparable prejudice and urgency. It notes that, pursuant to Article 41 of its statute, it has the power to indicate provisional measures when irreparable prejudice could be caused to rights which are the subject of judicial proceedings, or when the alleged disregard of such rights might entail irreparable consequences. However, the power of the Court to indicate provisional measures will only be exercised if there is urgency in the sense that there is a real and imminent risk that irreparable prejudice will be caused to the rights claimed before the Court gives its final decisions. The condition of urgency is met when the acts susceptible of causing irreparable prejudice can occur at any moment before the Court makes the final decision in the case. The Court must therefore consider whether such a risk exists at this stage of the proceedings. The Court is not called upon for purposes of its decision on the request for the indication of provisional measures to establish the existence of breaches of obligations under the Genocide Convention, but to determine whether the circumstances require the indication of provisional measures for the protection of rights under that instrument. As already noted, the Court cannot at this stage make definitive findings of fact, and the right of each party to submit arguments with respect to the merits remains unaffected by the Court's decision on the request for the indication of provisional measures. The Court recalls that, as underlined in General Assembly Resolution 96-1 of 11 December 1946, I quote, "Genocide is a denial of the right of existence of entire human groups, as homicide is the denial of the right to live of individual human beings. Such denial of the right of existence shocks the conscience of mankind, results in great losses to humanity in the form of cultural and other contributions represented by these human groups, and is contrary to moral law and to the spirit and aims of the United Nations." End of quote. In view of the fundamental values sought to be protected by the Genocide Convention, the Court considers that the plausible rights in question in this proceeding, namely, the right of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip to be protected from acts of genocide and related prohibited acts identified in Article 3 of the Genocide Convention, and the right of South Africa to seek Israel's compliance with the latter's obligation under the Convention, are of such a nature that prejudice to them is capable of causing irreparable harm. During the ongoing conflict, senior United Nations officials have repeatedly called attention to the risk of further deterioration of conditions in the Gaza Strip. The Court takes note, for instance, of the letter dated 6 December 2023, whereby the Secretary General of the United Nations brought the following information to the attention of the Security Council. I quote, "The healthcare system in Gaza is collapsing, nowhere is safe in Gaza. Amid constant bombarding by the Israel Defense Forces and without shelter or the essentials to survive, I expect public order to completely break down soon due to the desperate conditions rendering even limited humanitarian assistance impossible. An even worse situation could unfold, including epidemic diseases and increased pressure for mass displacement into neighboring countries. We are facing a severe risk of collapse of the humanitarian system. The situation is fast deteriorating into a catastrophe with potentially irreversible implications for Palestinians as a whole and for peace and security in the region. Such an outcome must be avoided at all costs." End of quote. On 5 January 2024, the Secretary General wrote again to the Security Council, providing an update on the situation in the Gaza Strip and observing that, I quote, "Sadly, devastating levels of death and destruction continue." End of quote. The court also takes note of the 17 January 2024 statement issued by the UNRWA Commissioner General upon return from his fourth visit to the Gaza Strip since the beginning of the current conflict in Gaza. I quote, "Every time I visit Gaza, I witness how people have sunk further into despair, with the struggle for survival consuming every hour." End of quote. The court considers that the civilian population in the Gaza Strip remains extremely vulnerable. It recalls that the military operation conducted by Israel after 7 October 2023 has resulted inter alia in tens of thousands of deaths and injuries and the destruction of homes, schools, medical facilities, and other vital infrastructure, as well as displacement on a massive scale. The court notes that the operation is ongoing and that the Prime Minister of Israel announced on 18 January 2024 that the war,
That was
I
8
quote,
days ago.
"will take many more long months." End of quote. At present, many Palestinians in the Gaza Strip have no access to the most basic foodstuffs, potable water, electricity, essential medicines, or heating. The World Health Organization has estimated that 15% of the women giving birth in Gaza Strip are likely to experience complications and indicates that maternal and newborn death rates are expected to increase due to the lack of access to medical care. In these circumstances, the court considers that the catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip is at serious risk of deteriorating further before the court renders its final judgment. The court recalls Israel's statement that it has taken certain steps to address and alleviate the conditions faced by the population in the Gaza Strip. The court further notes that the Attorney General of Israel recently stated that a call for intentional harm to civilians may amount to a criminal offense, including that of incitement, and that several such cases are being examined by Israeli law enforcement authorities. While such steps are to be encouraged, they are insufficient to remove the risk that irreparable prejudice will be caused before the court issues its final decision in the case. In light of the foregoing, the court considers that there is urgency in the sense that there is a real and imminent risk that irreparable prejudice will be caused to the rights found by the court to be plausible before it gives its final decision. The court concludes on the basis of the aforementioned considerations that the conditions required by its statute for it to indicate provisional measures are met. It is therefore necessary, pending its final decision, for the court to indicate certain measures in order to protect the rights claimed by South Africa that the court has found to be plausible. The court recalls that it has the power under its statute, when a request for provisional measures has been made, to indicate measures that are in whole or in part other than those requested. In the present case, having considered the terms of the provisional measures requested by South Africa and the circumstances of the case, the court finds that the measures indicated need not be identical to those requested. The court considers that, with regard to the present situation, Israel must, in accordance with its obligations under the Genocide Convention, in relation to Palestinians in Gaza, take all measures within its power to prevent the commission of all acts within the scope of Article 2 of the Convention, in particular, A, killing members of the group, B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, and D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. The Court recalls that these acts fall within the scope of Article 2 of the Convention when they are committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part the group as such. The Court further considers that Israel must ensure with immediate effect that its military forces do not commit any of the aforementioned acts. The Court is also of the view that Israel must take measures within its power to prevent and punish the direct and public incitement to commit genocide in relation to the members of the Palestinian group in the Gaza Strip. The Court further considers that Israel must take immediate and effective measures to enable the provision of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance to address the adverse conditions of life faced by Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Israel must also take effective measures to prevent the destruction and ensure the preservation of evidence related to allegations of acts within the scope of Article 2 and Article 3 of the Genocide Convention against members of the Palestinian group in the Gaza Strip. Regarding the provisional measure requested by South Africa that Israel must submit a report to the Court on all measures taken to give effect to the order, the Court recalls that it has the power, reflected in Article 78 of the Rules of Court, to request the parties to provide information on any matter connected with the implementation of any provisional measures it has indicated. In view of the specific provisional measures it has decided to indicate, the Court considers that Israel must submit a report to the Court on all measures taken to give effect to this order within 1 month as from the date of this order. The report so provided shall then be communicated to South Africa, which shall be given the opportunity to submit to the Court its comments thereon. The Court recalls that its orders on provisional measures under Article 41 of the statute have binding effect and thus create international legal obligations for any party to whom the provisional measures are addressed. The Court reaffirms that the decision given in the present proceedings in no way prejudges the question of the jurisdiction of the Court to deal with the merits of the case or any questions related to the admissibility of the application or to the merits themselves. It leaves unaffected the right of the governments of the Republic of South Africa and the State of Israel to submit arguments in respect of these questions. The order then states that the Court deems it necessary to emphasize that all parties to the conflict in the Gaza Strip are bound by international humanitarian law. It is gravely concerned about the fate of the hostages abducted during the attack in Israel on 7 October 2023 and held since then by Hamas and other armed groups, and calls for their immediate and unconditional release. I shall now read out the operative part of the order. For these reasons, the Court indicates the following provisional measures. 1. By 15 votes to 2, the State of Israel shall, in accordance with its obligations under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in relation to the Palestinians in Gaza, take all measures within its power to prevent the commission of all acts within the scope of Article 2 of the Convention. In particular,
I cannot believe
A,
it's 15 to 2.
killing
That
members
is
of the
insane.
group,
That is
B,
amazing.
causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, and D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. In favor, President Donahue, Vice President Gevorgian, Judges Tomka, Abraham, Benuna,
I bet it's
Yusuf,
Australia and
Shway,
Israel
Bandari,
against. Wow,
Robinson,
even the United States
Salam,
judge voted for this.
Iwasawa, Nolte, Charlesworth, Brandt, Judge Ad hoc Moseneke. Against, Judge Sebatunde, Judge Ad hoc Barak. By 15 votes to 2, the State of Israel shall ensure, with immediate effect, that its military does not commit any acts described in Part 1 above.
Okay.
In favor, President Donahue, Vice President Gevorgian, Judges Tomka, Abraham, Benuna, Yusuf, Shway, Bandari, Robinson, Salam, Iwasawa, Nolte, Charlesworth, Brandt, Judge Ad hoc Moseneke. Against, Judge Sebatunde, Judge Ad hoc Barak. By 16 votes to 1, the State of Israel shall take all measures within its power to prevent and punish the direct and public incitement to commit genocide in relation to members of the Palestinian group in the Gaza Strip. In favor, President Donahue, Vice President Gevorgian, Judges Tomka, Abraham, Benuna, Yusuf, Shway, Bandari, Robinson, Salam, Iwasawa, Nolte, Charlesworth, Brandt, Judges Ad hoc Barak, Moseneke. Against, Judge Sebatunde.
What's up with Judge
By 16
Sebatunde?
votes to 1, the State of
She's the
Israel shall
Ugandan
take
judge.
immediate and effective measures to ensure the provision of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance to address the adverse conditions of life faced by Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. In favor, President Donahue, Vice President Gevorgian, Judges Tomka, Abraham, Benuna, Yusuf, Shway, Bandari, Robinson, Salam, Iwasawa, Nolte, Charlesworth, Brandt, Judges Ad hoc Barak, Moseneke. Against,
they're even getting
Judge Sebatunde.
So a lot of these rulings are being
By
ruled on
15
by
votes to
Israel's
2,
own judge.
The State of
Judge
Israel
Barak.
shall take effective measures to prevent the destruction and ensure the preservation of evidence related to allegations of acts within the scope of Article 2 and Article 3 of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide against members of the Palestinian group in the Gaza Strip. In favor, President Donahue, Vice President Gevorgian, Judges Tomka, Abraham, Benuna, Yusuf, Shway, Bandari, Robinson, Salam, Iwasawa, Nolte, Charlesworth, Brandt, Judge Ad hoc Moseneke. Against, Judge Sebatunde, Judge Ad hoc Barak. By 15 votes to 2, the State of Israel shall submit a report to the court on all measures taken to give effect to this order within 1 month as from the date of the order. In favor, President Donahue, Vice President Gevorgian, Judges Tomka, Abraham, Benuna, Yusuf, Shway, Bandari, Robinson, Salam, Iwasawa, Nolte, Charlesworth, Brandt, Judge Ad hoc Moseneke. Against, Judge Sebatunde, Judge Ad hoc Barak. I shall now call upon the registrar to read the operative part of the order in French.
All right, so the reading in French. Apologies to the francophones, that is, in the audience. I'm just going to break this down a little bit. I will resume the audio of this hearing if need be, but basically, hold on. Okay, basically, this is a provisional ruling, so this is a sort of like a restraining order or a temporary restraining order that you hear about in other cases. It's the international equivalent of that. This is a humongous ruling. First of all, this is the second time an international court has ever held Israel accountable at all, and by far the biggest such holding. The other time was in 2004. There was a 14 to 1 ruling against Israel building walls around its settlements in the West Bank. This case has determined that, at least provisionally, Israel has committed acts that are likely to constitute genocide and that it must cease its actions. We're going to go through it in detail in just a minute, but that's the basic holding of the court today. In general, 15 judges voted in favor of it. Let me pull up my list of judges. The judges that voted in favor of it, hold on. are right here. So we've got, this is what I thought was going to be the likelihood of the judges voting for it. The one judge that voted against every aspect of it was Uganda. So I'm going to put, it's Uganda, and then in addition to these 15 judges, there's an Israel and South African judge that were appointed specifically for this case. Okay, so the South African, so here's how the vote actually went down. I'm just going to copy this. This was my prediction. Something like that would have been my prediction of how these judges, the more farther over here, the more likely they were to vote for it. But here's how it actually went down. Okay. This is awesome. The fact that the United States voted for this is amazing. Sorry. There we go. So we've got the Indian judge, the Jamaican judge, the Australian judge, which I didn't expect, Russia, Lebanon, Japan, and Germany. Okay, so all these countries voted for every provision of this request. Israel voted for like half of them, which is bananas to me. And then Uganda voted against all of them. So that is the breakdown of how the judges voted. That is a big deal. And now I'm seeing the breaking news finally catch up to where I'm at with this analysis. There we go. So we're just going to put that in line with that. Okay. So again, 15-2 in some aspects, 16-1 in other aspects. I'm really looking forward to reading through the ruling. It's going to be more detailed than what we saw from the court here. But that is the breakdown of the judges. Now, let's go through a little bit here about what's going on. So, for those who are just kind of looking at my post and kind of wondering what's going on, basically what's happening here is after October 7th, when Hamas attacked some cities in southern Israel, killing about 1,200 people, including about 350 militants, Israeli militants, and about 850 civilians, roughly. Israel responded by engaging in an unprecedented military campaign in the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip is a very small strip of land that Israel has been unlawfully occupying for 56 years. It is one of the most densely populated areas of the world. It is an area of land that is smaller than Queens, New York. It's very similar in size to Manhattan. Skinnier in some places. Israel has completely destroyed over half of this area. It is no longer cities. There used to be these humongous cities, and now these, certainly in northern Gaza, it's completely destroyed. Hold on one second. I gotta go back to the court.
A separate opinion to the order of the
She's
court.
talking about who's doing
The
side
text
opinions.
of the court will be available from today in TypeScript. It will be available shortly on the court's website. The
Okay,
printed
and I'm
text will
checking
be
the court's
available
website.
in due
It's not
course.
available yet.
As the court has no further business before it today, I declare the sitting closed.
Okay, that's huge. I'm really looking forward to hearing some analysis from some other folks. So I'm going to just very briefly go over this a little bit more. So let's turn this off and yeah. So again, this conflict started in the when Israel retaliated for October 7th by invading the Gaza Strip. And the problem is that Israel didn't just go after Hamas. They did a lot of things that went after civilians. If you just Google some information about this, percentage of buildings destroyed in Gaza, for example, 70% of homes have been damaged or destroyed, and I think I've read elsewhere that about half of all buildings in general have been damaged or destroyed. Yeah, down here. So first of all, there's a higher emphasis on housing. Secondly, can you imagine like Manhattan being over half leveled? Secondly, of course, if you go to the let me just pull this up on the other tab here. The Euromed Human Rights Monitor, which is a NGO that monitors things as far as damage and stuff. Here we go. So as you can see from the Euromed Human Rights Monitor, 33,360 people that we know about have been killed, 64,000 injured. So that's 100,000 people killed or injured, 117 journalists, the most of any conflict in the history of any recorded conflict. 2 million people displaced. That's pretty much everybody now. Completely destroyed. Like I said, 70% of the homes are either damaged or destroyed. So if you add those two numbers, 3 churches, 376 mosques have been basically destroyed. They've killed 172 UN workers, 328 schools. So the point is that this is a massive campaign that is clearly now, and nobody can really argue this. I mean, there's been a lot of argument going back to the early days of this conflict about whether Israel was doing this for the purpose of going after Hamas and saving the hostages, or whether they're doing this as a ethnic cleansing campaign. It's very clear just from the data that it's an ethnic cleansing campaign. It's just couldn't be more clear. Now, look, I've been saying this for years. I've been talking about this issue for years, as have many other people. But finally, for the first time ever, this case brought by South Africa, which I've got pulled up on the ICJ right here, is finally holding Israel accountable. And here is the application filed by South Africa in, I believe, December. And it's 84 pages, as you can see here. And it's this massive documentation of the genocide that's occurring in Gaza. Now, Israel has hardly ever been held accountable. Certainly, they get away with everything when they've slaughtered Gazans so many times. I mean, Israel, Gaza casualties by year. If you were to just do a little bit of research into this, you can see this. And this is something that in America we're taught not to learn about, because we're kind of brainwashed into assuming that Israel's always the good guy and Palestine is like these terrorists, right? But if you actually look at the data and you look at deaths and injuries from 2008 to 2020, this is before October 8th or 7th, I mean, it's just this massive disproportionate scale of like 20 to 1 on average. Right now, the conflict in Gaza has killed more than 30 times the number of people killed on October 7th. There are 39 people under the age of 18 killed in Israel on October 7th. There have been like 12,000 something children killed in Israel, the highest proportion of children killed in any conflict in modern history. The bombing of Gaza has exceeded the bombings of Dresden and Hamburg in terms of total buildings destroyed and per capita. And then the death toll is per capita higher than any conflict that has existed in recent memory over time. Certain conflicts have had more death and destruction, but it took years. This has been 104 days or something. So that's the basic background. So this case was brought by South Africa a little while ago, and basically it was asking the court to find genocide against Israel. Now this, of course, has a major implication. Israel is a state which was, supposedly founded to give Jewish refugees from Europe a place to live in safety after the Holocaust. And frankly, if that is the justification for Israel's founding, I can understand it. I think it became more complicated than that for a number of reasons over time, but basically that is why the state of Israel was founded, according to many of the people that supported its founding. And so when Israel is marched into the International Court of Justice, one of the most powerful and important courts in the world, and told, hey, you're committing genocide, the thing that you ostensibly were created to stop for your own people, it's a really huge slap in the face. And not only is it a slap in the face, it's a deserved slap in the face, because Israel is committing genocide. One other quick thing, real quick, I'm not going to spend my whole day commenting on this, but basically, there's an effort by AIPAC and by some of these groups that support Israel to conflate anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. Now, Zionism is the movement to create the state of Israel, basically. And so if you're opposed to what Israel's doing, there's a movement to say you're an anti-Semite. In fact, that is a absurd and inaccurate conflation of what it means to be an anti-Semite. In fact, I think the linking of Zionism and Judaism itself is anti-Semitic because it basically renders all Jewish people as de facto agents of the state of Israel, which is like a anti-Semitic trope itself. And the point is that you can be a critic of Israel and not be an anti-Semite. In fact, I am always careful to state that any form of bigotry, including bigotry against Jewish people, is horrible and evil, and it should be we should do everything we can to prevent it. And frankly, one of the reasons I care so much about this issue is because of the inspiration of many brave, especially younger Jewish people who have led the charge against what Israel is doing. The reason this matters to a lot of Americans is not only because of the sort of Orwellian disconnect that clearly genocide is being committed before our eyes, and yet our politicians, including the president that I, campaigned for and voted for, are supporting it. And the other reason, of course, is that we're funding it to the tune of about $4 billion a year. And it is atrocious that the bombs we are paying for are being used to slaughter so many children. And people like Mike Pence go over there and sign these bombs before they drop them. It's horrible. So that is why it matters. And again, we need to always separate criticism of the Israeli government versus criticism of the Jewish people, which would be a form of bigotry that I despise and would condemn in all cases. Now, if you let's just briefly go over this ruling. I'm going to use my Facebook post because that is where I was kind of let's see here. I was keeping track of it. By the way, I posted yesterday, Joe Biden's getting protested at every live appearance he makes. I'm here for it because he continues to blindly support Israel, and it's obnoxious. I also posted a poll that says among people who voted for Joe Biden in 2020, 50%, this is before the ruling now. This is before this ruling came out. 50% of Biden voters believed that Israel was committing genocide as of a few days ago. That number is going to go up after this ruling, I guarantee it. And only 20% believe it's not. So in other words, Joe Biden's own base of support was, oh, sorry, I'm like not on the computer screen here. Sorry about, I've got my friends list there and everything, but basically, yeah, that's the poll that I was looking at. But here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the ruling now, which I broke down, there's my live stream. Here we go. Okay, so I'm just going to go over the various aspects of the ruling real quick, and then we're going to end. Now, I might do another live stream later discussing this case more because it deserves that kind of discussion. But here's what the court did. Now, again, this is a provisional measures ruling. So in other words, it's basically a ruling that they're only doing a initial determination about whether genocide is occurring. The final decision about whether a genocide occurred will happen probably a couple years down the road. But for now, this provisional ruling is like a temporary restraining order or like a protective order you would get in a domestic assault case, for example. A lot of the time, if somebody commits domestic assault, the court does a no contact order. That's basically what this is. This is an international version of that. It's basically a thing that says, don't continue what you're doing. So the first thing is whether the court had jurisdiction. The court finds that there's jurisdiction because there was clearly a dispute between the parties. Now, this was an interesting argument that Israel made, but it wasn't very compelling because it was very well documented over weeks that South Africa was accusing Israel of genocide, and Israel's like, no, we're not. Fuck you, blah, blah, blah. So they clearly had a dispute, and the court dispensed with that quickly. Second, the court went on to determine whether the plausible initial evidence of genocide had been proven such that the court had jurisdiction. So this is slightly different than a ruling on the merits, but it is kind of indicative that the court was going to rule on the merits because in order to find jurisdiction, you have to have at least what they call prima facie evidence of genocide before you can have jurisdiction to make a decision on provisional measures in a genocide case. Third, did South Africa have standing to bring this genocide case? Well, the answer to that is yes, and the reason is this. The Convention Against Genocide says that any state may enforce this if it, in fact, if you go down to Article 3, Article 4, here we go. The contracting parties undertake to enact, in accordance with their respective constitutions, the necessary legislation to give effect to this, blah, blah, blah. Persons charged with this shall be tried by a competent tribunal. Genocide and other acts shall not be considered as political crimes. Any contracting party may call upon the organs of the United Nations to take such action. So this actually right here, Article 8 of the Genocide Convention says that any member of this treaty, this convention, may call upon, when it uses this organ of the United Nations language that includes the ICJ, to take such action under the appropriate rules. And then Article 9 here, disputes between contracting parties relating to the interpretation, applicability, or fulfillment, blah, 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 shall be submitted for the ICJ at the request of any party. So again, definitionally there's jurisdiction, and Israel signed this. Israel signed this in 1950, right? I love that. One of history's ironies is that Israel signs the Genocide Convention in 1950 right after they do the Nakba, which is the thing where they massacred and displaced about 750,000 Palestinians during the initial formation of the State of Israel. It was kind of the predecessor to what we're seeing now in Gaza. So because of Articles 8 and 9, the court found that it did have jurisdiction to proceed under the Genocide Convention. Fourth, the court had to decide whether the evidence submitted plausibly demonstrated a case for genocide. And so briefly, again, this is similar to the jurisdictional prima facie consideration of the evidence, but it goes a little bit further here. And the court determined that there was pretty good evidence of likely, plausibly genocidal acts by Israel, including its own statements of intent, which the court read 3 of, which I was very pleased to see. Israel's finally getting some comeuppance for some of the horrible, dehumanizing statements of its leaders, like when Netanyahu calls Palestinians children of darkness and Israelis children of light, and calls upon, quoting biblical language, the destruction of every man, woman, and child and livestock in Gaza. When he explicitly calls for the mass murder of children, you know that's not going to fly. All right. Fifth, the court ruled that South Africa requested certain relief, and the court ruled there's a link between the requested relief and the action that's occurring that constitutes genocide. In other words, the provisions that the court was going to take would address the proven claims of genocide, the provisionally proven claims of genocide. Sixth, the court decided if they didn't act now, like maybe down the road the court could find that there was genocide and then somebody could sue the other person and get some money or whatever. No, the court said that that's not good enough because the status quo of the parties to the conflict are being undermined as we speak in order to preserve the rights of the parties. That and going to seventh here, that the deterioration was extremely high, the likelihood of deterioration was extremely high. The court thus needed to act and did so in order to preserve the status of the parties. Eighth, second to last, the court, having ruled that genocide was occurring and that it was redressable, came up with a 5-point order. 1, Israel, stop doing genocide. Okay, that's essentially step 1. Step 2, Israel must take action to ensure its agents stop committing genocide. Third, Israel must take immediate efforts to ensure all reasonable humanitarian aid is allowed in and to allow people to have access to humanitarian supplies to prevent mass death. So Israel was accused of starving out and depriving of water and medical supplies and so forth. And the court is basically saying, Israel, you cannot do that. You got to stop. Next, fourth, Israel must take steps to ensure in the future different procedures that will prevent these acts from occurring regardless of whether they intend to or not. And then fifth, finally, Israel must provide reports to the court regarding these measures within 1 month. Now, again, going back to my list of judges, of those 5 things, I just want to point out, Uganda voted against all of them, which, Uganda is on the court here. It's this judge here, who I was absolutely convinced was going to rule for South Africa, but she didn't. Maybe I'll have to look into why she voted that way. But Anyway, she voted that way. So even Israel, though, my point was going to be, voted for, I think, 1 and 3. So I think that Judge Barak from Israel itself voted that Israel needs to stop doing genocide and that it needs to let more humanitarian aid in. I think I could be getting that wrong. But even the Israeli judge voted for that. And in any event, all 15 of the 17 judges voted for all of these. So, okay, that's a huge deal. 9, all state actors must give this ruling legal effect. I'm really curious to read that language. This is something that comes up in these cases where the courts are basically ordering, okay, there's a finding of genocide. Now every country in the world has to follow the law regarding genocide, stopping genocide from occurring. So let me just pull this convention up again. Extend that prevent convention, blah blah blah. Was foreign relations and contract that contracting parties responsible. Extend the application of the present convention to all any other territories. For yeah, okay. That's just procedural. Okay, let me go back to the beginning of this. So, Article 1 talks about we affirm genocide is a war crime and we want to prevent it. 2 is how you do genocide. And just real quick, basically, you kill, injure, make life unlivable, prevent births or transfer children from a group with the intent to destroy that group in whole or in part based on their national, ethnic, or racial or religious identity. And then, so here's what is punishable under this convention. The genocide itself, conspiring to commit genocide, which is when you plan it with somebody else, oh, I keep forgetting that I need to switch. Oh, no, I've got my screen up. Okay. Direct and public incitement to commit genocide. So again, this is something the court mentioned. There are leaders in Israel trying to get people to do the genocide. That is incitement to genocide. Inciting means you cause somebody else to do it. Attempt genocide, so that means trying genocide and failing. And then finally, and this is the big one, complicity in genocide. So the convention says you can't be complicit in genocide. If you just, complicity definition. Complicity means the state of being involved with others in an illegal activity or wrongdoing, okay? So that's a very broad definition, isn't it? So when we get our, hold on, where's the Facebook? When we get to the point here where the ruling, God, where did I put the Facebook tab? Well, anyway, the point is when we get to the ruling for the number 9 thing, which I just mentioned and I can't find the tab for. How do I lose a tab? I don't know. Here it is, finally. Okay. So 9, all state actors must give this ruling legal effect. In other words, states which follow the Genocide Convention, which is the vast majority of states, let me just show you that, including Israel and Palestine and the United States, were all signatories to this convention. Sorry, I don't want that actually. I want the Wikipedia map. All the green countries have to follow this now. Okay, so that's what that means. It means that all the states that are subject to the Genocide Convention cannot be complicit in genocide. So when we go over here, who's complicit in the genocide? Well, obviously Israel itself is. That's why they got this bitch slap of a ruling handed down. But who else is helping Israel? Well, the United States is, the UK is, to a lesser extent Australia, Canada, and then there's a handful of Polynesian states. Incidentally, by the way, I was looking up some things the other day, and of all the states in the world that exist that have a favorable voting record for Israel, I want to show you this real quick. pardon me while I scroll through my other posts about this issue. But where would I have done that? Let's see. It should be around here. Yeah, I think it's yeah, here we go. Okay, here's my post on this. Let's see. I don't know how to. I was trying to bring that up, but anyway, the point is, going back down here. So the only states in the world that have a pro-Israel voting record in the UN, which is more of a general thing, is Australia, the United States. The United States has a 94% pro-Israel voting record. Australia has a 40%, which is very large, actually. It's like the 6th largest, I think. And then these client states that are barely countries, Micronesia, Marshall Islands, Nauru, and Palau, each have these percentages of pro-Israel voting records. Besides those, Australia is like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th most pro-Israel voting record in the world, and it's at 40%. So the reason that that is the case is because Israel does a lot of crazy shit, and the world generally doesn't like it, but we kind of put up with it because it's Israel, and there's a lot of European guilt over the Holocaust and stuff like that, so Israel gets away with a lot of stuff. But anyway, the point is that under the Genocide Convention, those are the states that are most likely to be abetting genocide or complicit in genocide, and especially the United States. So now that there's an adverse ruling against Israel, the United States, which is a signatory to the Genocide Convention, is required to not be complicit in genocide lest they befall its provisions. So because of that, the United States will now be under pressure to stop helping Israel commit genocide. What does that mean? Well, it certainly means that it's going to have to stop doing ad hoc weapon supplies to Israel. Now, if there's a pre-existing, ongoing, generic weapon funding scheme, I suppose the United States could argue that it's not complicit, it's just doing what it's always done, blah, blah, blah. I think it's a bad argument. I think that that argument would fail, but I think that there's going to be real pressure on the United States not to continue. Now, I think the reality is the United States is probably not going to follow that pressure. It's probably going to just let the genocide continue or whatever, and it's probably going to keep supplying Israel with weapons. I've read a lot of reports on this, and frankly, I think that there's a lot of people who are probably basically not people in the administration who are basically ideologically committed to continuing the mass slaughter in Gaza. But to the extent that there are lawyers and people who are cognizant of international obligations, I mean, here's the reality. The United States is the most powerful country in the world militarily, so it's not like somebody's going to like forcibly impose an ICJ ruling on us or Israel, our client state. But what could happen is some other country could say, hey, the United States is doing genocide and is complicit in genocide. Hey, did you not see the ruling? And then that country could be like, well, how can the United States have sanctions against us when they're the ones doing the genocide? And so a lot of these like global South countries, BRICS countries and otherwise, might start diplomatically forming a coalition that goes against the United States' interests. Here's the binding part of this ruling, both for Israel and the United States. It is going to create diplomatic pressure and a wedge in the world against the United States, as it should, and it's going to empower countries that have a different view than the United States. And here's what it's specifically going to do. It's going to cause everybody in the world to understand that when the United States talks about genocide in Ukraine, and when the United States talks about innocent deaths in Ukraine, let me just pull this up. When the United States talks about those things, we're hypocrites. We are. And there's no way around that. Like, I support largely what we're doing in Ukraine. I think that the Ukrainians are victims of Russian aggression, and they deserve, to be aided in their fight against that oppression. But here's the thing. If you get statistics on both of these conflicts, okay? Casualties of the Russo-Ukrainian conflict. All right, let me pull this up here. Okay, so as you can see here, there are several estimates of civilian casualties in Ukraine. Let's look at them. 11,000 plus confirmed civilian casualties as of November. And 10,000 plus killed, about 18,000 wounded is another estimate. And that's for civilians. There's maybe been 70,000 militants in Ukraine killed, maybe 120,000 Russian militants killed, with more private forces. But the point is, the civilians are about 11,000 killed, 18,000 wounded. Now let's go over to the Euromed Human Rights Monitor and look at that. And we've got 33,000 civilians killed, 64. So again, you remember that number? It was 11,000 for this one, so it's 3 times as many. And then 18, which if you do the math on that, ends up being about between 3 and 4 times as many, have been killed in Gaza. And there's 2 astonishing caveats to that observation. First of all, Gaza has a population of 2.2 million people or so. Ukraine population, 44 million roughly. It's gone down a little bit because of this war. So in other words, it's 22 times larger, and yet Gaza has had 4 times the number, or 3 times the number of deaths, and even more than that injured. Okay, so that's one. Second, the Gaza situation has been going on since October 7th, which is a little over 100 days. If you go to Ukraine, that's been going on since February 2022, about 2 years. So 4 months to 2 years. It's what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 1/6 the time, and 22 times the population. Yet Gaza has 3 times the deaths, and almost 3 to 4 times the injuries. It's astonishing when we look at those casualty numbers, because if you care about civilian casualties, as we all do, and we should, as many of our leaders claimed to, the reality is that you can't sit there with a straight face and say Ukraine civilian casualties are a problem and we need to address that, and we're going to fund Ukraine and sanction Russia, blah 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 blah, and then say, oh, there's a conflict between Israel and Gaza, where yes, Hamas, a militant faction within Gaza, not the government. I mean, it was elected at one point years ago, but it wasn't popularly elected. It never had a majority. It had 44%, and that was in 2006. And thereafter, there hasn't been a single election. The average age in Gaza is like 19 or something. So most people in Gaza either weren't alive or certainly couldn't vote for Hamas. So it's not the government of Hamas that these people voted for. It's the de facto government of Gaza. But in any event, their militant wing launched an attack, yes. And Israel responded by killing, for every 1 person killed in Gaza, they killed 30 people in, I'm sorry, for every 1 person killed in Israel, they killed 1 person in Gaza. By the way, let me just pull this up because I want to be really clear about this. So just I'm kind of going on a extended discussion. I mean, if you're still with me, great. If you're not, yeah, feel free to enjoy my analysis here for a little bit longer. But so if you look at the numbers killed on October 7th, here's the reality, okay? About 1,200 people were killed. And so of that 1,200, let me just pull this up. Okay, so I've got a news article from France 24 here. So, okay, this French article is breaking down that 1,200 number. Okay, let me pull this up. Now, this is the same numbers that I'm familiar with, so this is, I can confirm this is accurate, because this is largely sourced from Israel itself. But, okay, here's the number. 1139 people were killed that have been identified as from Israel. That includes 36 children. I think I've seen 39 children as well. So there might be some ambiguity about 3 of those. But 373 of the people killed on October 7th were security forces. About 700 were civilians, okay? So over a third of the people killed on October 7th were militants. And, okay, so if you add the 71, I guess you have to add, so it's 9, 10, 60, 11, yeah. So you add the 71 foreigners to the civilian death toll, so you get about 765, 66, 766, okay? And then 373. So it is about a 2-to-1 ratio. Now, so that means for every 1 military target, there were 2 civilian targets. Now, let's just Google this. I have my opinion about this, but let's just Google civilian to combatant death ratio Gaza. The Israeli Defense Ministry, which is by far the most invested group making claims here, has alleged a 2-to-1 civilian to militant ratio, which is exactly the same as Hamas. Now, there's other sources here. The Gaza Ministry of Health, whose numbers are being relied upon by Israel, its intelligence agency, and the news stations in Israel, says about 75% of Palestinian casualties were civilians. And then here's a Jewish source that's claiming about 4.5 to 1. Civilians, this is a Guardian article from December, said about 61%. So, I mean, look, those are some of the publicly available. But look, here's the thing. We know that of this 33,000 who were killed, 13,000 were children, 7,000 were women. So that means that about 20,000 of the 33,000 are basically definitionally not Hamas. And so the question is, of the remaining 10,000 or so, or 13,000 men that were killed, of that number, how many were militants? Even if you are generous and say half, that means that 27, what's 27 divided by 30? That means that our ratio is whatever this is. Okay, 82% civilian death ratio versus the 2-to-1 ratio. So, in other words, this is a 4-to-1 ratio. This is higher than a 4-to-1 ratio. So it's more than double the number of civilians per militant killed by Israel. Now, that's using a generous estimate. Now, let me show you this other thing. All right. U.S. estimates that number of Hamas killed. Okay, so this is a news report from a few days ago that's been making the rounds. And according to U.S. intelligence, which, again, very biased in favor of Israel, states that about 20 to 30% of Hamas's fighters have been killed. And let me read the rest of the article, but okay, just keep that number in mind, 20 to 30%. Now, if you look up Hamas total number, I've seen anywhere from 20 to 40,000. Let's see here. Let's see if it this is an early article. Yeah, so here's a pretty plausible number here. So 20 to 25,000. So if you take 20% let's get the range here. 20% of 20,000. Again, pulling up my trusty calculator on my computer here. I take 20,000 times 0.2, which is 20%. That means about 4,000, okay? And then if you go with the 25,000 number and you take 30%, which is the generous number, you get 75. So you get between 4,000 and 7,500 people. Now, that's exactly what I just estimated here. I said that about 20,000 were off the table, so you got 13,000 to work with, and if you do half of 13,000, it's 6,500. So my estimate with 82% civilian death ratio was basically premised on 6,500 members being Hamas. But if you go with the 4,000 number, it's even worse for Israel. And I think the 4,000 number is pretty plausible, honestly. I think that estimates of Hamas deaths have been exaggerated. I think it's very clear that Israel is not targeting Hamas particularly. They're targeting a lot of civilians. So if you take about 4,000 divided by 33, so it'd be 29,360, which is the remaining number from this. That ends up being 13.6, about 14, rounded up to 14%, which means that 86% have been civilian. 4,000 equals about 14%. So if you're only killing, if everybody you're killing, only 14% of them are militants, what it, 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's like 1/8. It's like basically 1/8. Out of every 8 people you kill, one of them's a militant, and 7 are innocent civilians. I think that is an outrageous proportion, and it's more than double. It's more than double that of what Hamas did on October 7th. So when we talk about who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, I mean, it is a little bit more complicated than a black and white thing. But and Hamas is not. I'm not a fan of Hamas. I think Hamas did a horrible act on October 7th, but I also understand that history doesn't begin on October 7th, and you have to contextualize why people in Gaza might have felt that their only option was to commit an act of brutal violence to change things up. For years and years, for 56 years, Israel has illegally occupied Gaza, and for many years, it has been getting more and more and more restrictive on the rights of people living there. The reality is that in order to solve, okay, I'm just going to end the stream here with a call to how to solve this. I'm going to pull up United Nations Resolution 242. This is the UN resolution that proposed a 2-state settlement for Israel and Gaza, and that, or for Palestine, in which the Palestinians have largely been amenable to, but which has never been offered to them by Israel. This is the West Bank, this is the Gaza Strip, and obviously when this was first proposed, Israel was also occupying the Egyptian Sinai Desert. That has since been returned to Egypt, so you draw a line there. But Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the Prime Minister of Israel, he opposes a Palestinian state. He always has, and he always will. Here's the quote. He just said this the other day. So, when I was arguing with my friends on Facebook about this isn't about Hamas, it's about this evil man enacting his long-term vision for Gaza, which is to prevent Palestinian statehood and thus to ethnically cleanse Gaza. Everybody, I had some friends who were like, oh, don't be so crazy, you're exaggerating. Well, it's hard to cast down on that. I mean, Netanyahu has made his intention clear. He does not support a Palestinian state ever. And he has been proposing different ways to get rid of the Palestinians from Palestine. And that is the definition of ethnic cleansing. So, look, I'm going to end the stream here. It's been fun. I'll do more later, probably analyzing this once I have a chance to read it. But the reality is that, I posted this thing about genocide back on November 11th. And if you haven't read it, you should. Basically, I go through why Israel's engaging in genocide. I talk about how the death toll has been proportionately, and this was back when there were only 4,500 children killed, I debunk some of the arguments against genocide, and then I go into all of the historians and legal experts who think there was a genocide. I compare it to other historic genocides. Let me just do that real quick, so that's really interesting if you haven't seen that. List of genocides. People don't understand what genocide is. There's been a lot. Okay, I'm gonna sort these from lowest death toll to highest. So there was a very small genocide for a very small group of people. I mean, the reason some of these are small is because the group of people being attacked and killed are small. You've got genocides as small as 40 or 60 people. I would agree those are pretty small numbers, but look at the percentage. The Osage here, 60 of them were killed. That's about 10% of their entire population. And that took 13 years to do 10%. You look at, let's do some ones that people might be more familiar with. Okay, the Rohingya genocide is a case that's presently at the United Nations as well. And the number there that have been killed in, let's see, 7 years has been maybe 14,000. So Israel has already more than doubled, doubled that. And that's in a country with, well, I don't know how many Rohingyas are as a percentage of the population. 100,000 are confined in camps, 13. That might be a pretty big percentage. I don't know. I'd have to look what the percentage is. It's about 1.3 million, so about half of Gaza. So if you just double this, the Rohingya genocide has already been found to be a genocide too by the United Nations. So now if you double this to 18,000, that's about the equivalent of how many have been killed in Myanmar. So that gives you kind of perspective there. Let's go down to the Bosnian genocide. This one I think is interesting compared to the conservative estimate for the number of Bosnians killed during this time was about 3% of the population, the Bosniak population in Bosnia, and about 31,000. So again, going back to Euromed Human Rights, 33,000. We are already over that. So everybody agrees that Slobodan Milosevic did a genocide in Bosnia, and he only killed 31,000 people, about 3% of the total population. Right now, we're up to more than that in raw numbers, and if you do the math on this, it's approaching about 2% of the total population of Gaza. Now let's go down to, I mean, this is the closest raw number here. I mean, the problem is that some of these older ones, they have wild estimates, and so it's hard to know exactly which one is which, but and then obviously you get down to things that are bigger. You get the Bangladesh genocide, the Greek and Turkish genocide, where Turkey killed about 25% of the Greeks in Turkey there, which is 300,000 people. But that's a percentage of the total Greek population. That was a pretty big one. 400,000, 500,000. Rwanda was about 500,000. This one was one of the worst ones in the history of the world. Yeah, about 60 or 70%. So that's actually a higher percentage than the Jewish Holocaust committed by the Nazis. Although this may not include Tutsis in other countries, so I'm not sure if that number pans out. But nonetheless, 500,000 was horrific, and I think we need to keep that in mind. I wasn't really aware of what was going on. I was too young, but I'm sure I would have been screaming from the rooftops on that one. The Armenian genocide, this one is famous. 600,000 Armenians killed by the Turks. Cambodian genocide, famous. Vietnam era, 1.3 million, 1.4 million. This is the one that is largely associated with Henry Kissinger, who died recently. May he be forever tormented in hell. The Germans did a few. Okay, they killed 1.8 million Poles, who are Poles, non-Jewish Poles, Polish Gentiles. Maybe 6 to 10% of the Polish population. So we're talking in Gaza, we're going to have similar numbers if it goes on for this same time frame. I mean, it's going to actually, if we're doing 2 to 3% a year, and if you give them 6 years, that's going to be 12 to 18% of the population there. So I mean, that's kind of the rate that this is going at. You look at the Ukrainian Soviet genocide, 3 million. Again, a long time ago, it's hard to get exact numbers, but that's a big one. German atrocities committed against the Soviets, 3.3 million. And then, of course, the Nazi Holocaust, which was 4.2. Well, so it's the typical number accepted of Jews who were killed in the Holocaust, about 6 million. This is a lower estimate. I'm going to stick maybe more with the 6 million. But, you know, there were about 18 million Jews worldwide at the time, but I guess there were about half of them were in Europe, so 2/3 of the European Jewish population, but, you know, maybe a third of the world Jewish population. And again, the most horrific raw number of deaths ever in a genocide as well. So that is where the term genocide comes from, is in the wake of the Holocaust. And so when we look at the Nazi Holocaust and look at the fact that, you know, around 6 million Jews were killed, it's about a third of the global population of Jews, 2/3 of the local population of Jews that were subject to the Nazi direct control. You know, that is the biggest one of all, really. And if you compare Gaza to that, obviously that's not in the same ballpark yet. And I highly doubt it will be. And certainly it's not as gruesome as the Nazi Holocaust, because we kind of have this inoculation to genocide when it occurs during warfare, rather than genocide when it occurs at a prison camp or a concentration camp. But I wonder if this page is going to update. I bet this page will now update to have at least provisional entry on the Gaza genocide. Let me see if there's a Gaza. Yeah, there's no Gaza reference on genocide here yet. I'm sure there are a lot of battles on Wikipedia pages being fought over whether to include that. But anyway, I just wanted to stream a little bit today and talk about the genocide and the case specifically involving genocide in the Gaza Strip. Before I finish, I just wanted to do one more check and see if the ruling is out. Yes, here it is. Okay, let's pull up the ruling. Okay, so we've got an 86-page ruling, which is awesome. And here are all the judges. Again, the South African judge and the Israeli judge, as well as the other judges I mentioned. You know, and just again to refresh your memory: Somalia, China, Slovakia, France, Morocco, Brazil, US, Uganda, India, Jamaica, Australia, Russia, Lebanon, Japan, Germany, UK. Those are all the judges. Actually, no, I'm sorry. The UK is not on the court. Why did I put the UK on this list to track its voting record? Okay, UK is not on the court. Sorry about that. And those are the judges. After having regard to Articles 1 and 48 of the Statute of the Court and Article 70, those are procedural references. And then it goes into the background of the case and what was requested by South Africa. Okay. You know what? I'm going to go through this in my own time, but I'm going to scroll to the end. I'm going to maybe do another stream later where I go through this in depth. To the order of the court. Judge Sebutine appends a dissenting opinion. Judge, I want to read that dissent. About Sebutinde. But let me just go here to the operative 15-2. Israel shall take all measures within its power to prevent the commission of all acts of genocide. So that's the first of the 5 that I talked about. That's 1. And that was 15-2. So Israel and Uganda voted against. 2. Again, 15-2. Israel shall ensure its military doesn't do any genocide. 15-2. And then 3, here's one that Israel voted for. Israel shall take measures within its power to punish any incitement to genocide. So the Israeli judge voted in favor of that one. by 16-1, again, with the Israeli judge in favor, Israel shall take humanitarian assistance. And then 15-2, Israel must take action to ensure preservation. Okay, I kind of misstated this one earlier in my analysis. Israel must preserve evidence related to the commission of genocide. 15-2, and then 6, 50. So I thought there were only 5, but I missed number 5 there. I must have been distracted. The 6th one is Israel shall issue the report. Okay, and that's 15-2. So again, the Israeli judge voted for A, stop doing incitement and punish people that incite genocide, and 2, do humanitarian aid. And then the rest of it was 15-2. So that's pretty interesting. I'm gonna read through here and see if I can get a handle on the dissents. Okay, here we go. I know that's the beginning of it. Does it just not have the dissent attached? Well, congratulations to South Africa. Anyway, I don't... Standing... I'm just scrolling through. I'm not reading in detail. But this is good stuff. Risk of irreparable injury. Conclusion. 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, it just says they dissent, but it doesn't actually give me the dissent. Okay, so orders. Yeah, I don't see the dissent in there. Hopefully that'll come up at some point and I can read it, but I'm just curious what the Ugandan judge's reasoning was. But I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. I think I'm going to read through this on my own time, and then I'll stream again later and we'll explain it. Anyway, I know it's early. Thanks for those of you who woke up early to watch this with me and to hear my analysis. If you have any questions, hit me up. Otherwise, you know, I love talking about issues like this, and it's important. I think it's, as I close, let me just say that it's so important in this case. Why is this case so important? Because genocide is the most serious crime that we have as a species, really. I mean, if you think about it. I mean, think about your state or your nation that you live in. A lot of the most serious crimes in these places is murder, right? Especially first-degree murder, intentional murder, really gruesome types of murder. Now imagine taking that and putting it on steroids and applying it to an entire ethnicity of people. I mean, it's really the most serious crime that we have as a species. Because of that, this case is arguably one of the most important cases that any of us will ever witness in our lifetime. All genocide cases are the most serious cases. And there's only been a few in recent history. The Rohingya one in Myanmar, I think there's one for Sudan. There's one that addressed Slobodan Milosevic in a criminal case. I mean, I'd have to go back and look at all the cases. But the point is, they're not common, but they're common enough to be unfortunate. But this is a really big one because the United States, where I live, funds this genocide. We support it. And so it is of particular interest to us, and it's really important that we stand up against it if we care about justice and we care about preserving human dignity regardless of the ethnicity of the people being attacked. So thank you so much for watching this stream. I'll be back later with more analysis, and we'll go from there.